So our brain, this wonderful organ up here in our heads that has hundreds and billions of cells, literally hundreds of billions of cells, that's how it's made up, is the size of a coconut, approximately. And it sits there in this really hard skull, in this hard shell. And it's about the texture of a jelly. So if you've got nice solid jellies and you stick your finger in, that is how the brain feels, really jelly-like. It's the colour of raw meat, red raw meat. So when you see a lot of people say grey, but that's when the brain is usually dead. There's no oxygen in it, but it's red raw. So how much do you think it weighs, being the most powerful organ in our body? How much do you think your brain weighs on that neck of ours? Have a guess.
2 kilos.
No. 3 pounds. 3 pounds, okay? So when you think about it, all those hundreds of millions of cells that are running around inside that head of ours, it's only 3 pounds, but you know, our neck is only this big and it's holding it all up there with this great big solid wood helmet on there, our great big cycle helmet on there. So the brain is made up of 2 halves, okay, right and left hemisphere. The left operates the right side of the body, and the right is the left side of the body. And basically, there are 3 key areas, okay, the cerebellum, which is the big part here, then we've got the base here, and then we've got the brain stem. And the brain stem is like the broccoli stem, okay, and that is what feeds up and down between our body, up and down. So if that brain is cut there, the stem is cut between head and body, the messages can't get through. So that's when you get total paralysis. And nothing moves, nothing is felt, etc., etc. But there are senses that still will work, because obviously things like vision and hearing come in this way in the head. You see, obviously, and you hear. So this is why sometimes when you've got total paralysis of somebody, you can they will still be able to see and they will still be able to hear, process. Okay, so these billions and billions of cells, if you can imagine, like the whole of the UK, all our phone systems, everybody that's got their phone, some may have 2, and you've got wires all over the place and they're interconnecting and people are connecting and people are connecting. And then suddenly the whole of Hertfordshire goes out, dead. No phone calls, no wires, nothing is working. How long do you think it would take to get those phones working again and those wires connecting again? A day? A week? A month? Potentially a year? You'd hope not. But essentially, if that amount of wires and phones went down, that space, you'd have a major problem and take a very long time to fix. So that's how you've got to kind of think about the brain with those cells in there. Those cells, once they've had an injury or once they have been crushed or once they are dead, it's going to be very, very difficult to get them going again. So actually this is why with brain injury rehabilitation can take a very, very long time for us to get results. Okay. Inside the brain, I'm going to make it work again, shall I? So inside the brain, when you cut it in half, so you've got the main 2 lobes and then you've got the central part in the middle. All the information comes up that stem, up and down, up and down. And the information that comes up through that stem, okay, it's like the tree trunk, and then it branches out from there, and all the information then starts getting filed into the different areas of the brain. And where are we? There's a very key element in the centre of this brain, okay, called the middle brain, and it's the limbic system, part of the limbic system, and that's really where it controls immediate responses. So I'm hungry, or I'm really angry and I want to go hit that person. It's called kind of like the basic brain, the basic sort of feelings and senses and emotions of our brain. And it works really hard with the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is really like the filter into the rest of the world. And the frontal lobe is what stops us from going and hitting that person. Because actually, even though you're really angry, it's not right to go up and just punch somebody if you feel that way. So the frontal part of the brain stops you from doing that. It filters and says, are you really wanting to do this? It tests your judgment, it tests your understanding. So also within that brainstem that comes shooting up, okay, and gives us all of our information in that brainstem, is where the basic functions are. So how our heart beats, how we breathe, how we sleep. So those are some of the key functions as well, and certainly within brain injury and accidents and collisions, etc., that's a fundamental area deep in the brain that it's very difficult for any neurosurgeon or anybody to get right inside to fix, but where it's the most protected. But if the injury is anywhere near there, then we have serious problems, okay? So then we go into our different lobes. So the frontal lobe, I like to call it the chief executive of the body, okay? It's an incredibly important part of the brain because, like I said, the chief executive is the organizer, the planner, the memory, the one that actually helps us problem solve. It also is our personality. It's also the area that determines emotionally who we are. It's how everybody recognises and understands us. So we'll talk about this ongoing, but this is a major part of when injuries happen in this frontal lobe. That's where the issues can start coming up because it's affecting our way of controlling ourselves, okay? In the good old days, it's quite shocking when you read what they used to do, because the thing with neurology is that the development and research is ongoing all the time, and it is so incredible what they're discovering all the time. Once upon a time, if somebody was angry and aggressive, have you heard of frontal lobotomies? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they used to take them in and slice off a bit, you know, that'll sort them out. Just get in there and chop off a bit of the brain. You know, when I think about that now, it's like, oh my God, how on earth did they know what they were chopping out or what they were doing? But essentially, they would chop off that bit of brain and then they go, look, isn't that wonderful? What a result. She's sitting there and being completely passive and not doing a thing. We've had a result. But ultimately, what you were doing is completely changing the personality of somebody. They become static. They become not themselves anymore. Their personality had gone. So this is where, you know, cognitive rehabilitation, the things that Emma does and I do out there in the community all the time and working with these people, is to try and really rewire and sort out these frontal lobes. Cognitive rehabilitation.
Excuse me, this is the first one, you mean?
That's the first one. Hurrah! Okay. So, just so that we're clear, we have all these hundreds of cells, okay, and they are called neurons, little neurons. And off the neurons, if you can imagine, this is really basic, and they're tiny, you can't see it, they've got axons, okay, and those are the wires. So this is our branch with our axons and our neurons at the neurons. At the end, these neurons are like light bulbs. They switch on and off, switch on and off, switch on and off. Everything we do. So I touch that wood, I look out, see the sun, I'm looking across the room, everybody's face is thinking, oh, I'm standing here, 50%. All of this information is going in, and these light bulbs are going kick, 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 okay? What happens is one neuron then sparks and then sparks off another neuron, okay? And chemicals are shared between, and I'm not going to go into the technical names, but one of them that you might know is dopamine. There's a classic. So certainly for people with Parkinson's, they reduce in their dopamine, don't they? And that doesn't get shot across. And what happens? Everybody gets a bit rigid and a bit slower, and they're not working as effectively. Multiple sclerosis, the lining on that wire axon is being attacked and is being affected. So that electrical wire is getting interrupted. So that's what happens with multiple sclerosis. So those are long-term neurological conditions, which I work with as well. They're all part of the neurological umbrella. But today, particularly, we are looking at acquired brain injury. Please let it work. So it is said as well that apparently that energy and that power that goes on that synapse release and acceptance can actually power a 60-watt light bulb. That is how powerful it is. So you imagine that going off in your head all the time. It is a powerful organ. And some of the tests that the doctors will look at to see how effective our brains are is an EEG. And that's the electrical currents, basically. That's what it's testing. So if somebody's been having an EEG on their brain, they're trying to look at the effectiveness, and often that's what happens with people like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. They'll look at their EEGs. Okay. I think I'm just going to whip through these lobes, okay? But temporal lobe is more in this area. Okay, left side, I always go left is language, right is visual and motor, but they all mix very much. Every area has got these different elements, okay? So they are temporal lobe: language, spoken word, attention, sexuality, inhibitions, aggression. So all still part of this great big amazing part of our brain here, okay? The cortex. And then I've told you about the basics. The brainstem, a lot of people call it like the Neanderthal brain, okay? The Neanderthal brain, because it is the basic instincts: flight, fight, cold, hot, angry, all of those. And then we've got the cerebellum, which is that base, and a lot of this is related to balance and coordination. So again, you can imagine, the reason why you need to kind of be aware of this stuff and understand the brain a bit is because of, if your client has got a brain injury, I mean, I've got somebody at the moment who has got a huge dip in his head on the right-hand side, like completely, because his brain has shrunk and has moved. But also it's understanding the sites of those brains, and you kind of think, well, okay, why is that person so different to that person? Why is that person doing that and that person can't do that? It's because of the site of their brain. It's where the injury has been in the brain. Okay, occipital lobe is vision. It's at the back. Obviously eyes and nerves, etc., but that all feeds in, and it's all around the back. Okay, so that exercise. Okay. I've got an exercise for you now. I want you all interactive. Okay. Can you see this little boy? Can you see what he's doing? Okay. Can you tell me, just shout out, what's the brain allowing this boy to do in this picture right now?
To laugh.
Yeah.
Feel emotion.
Yeah. So feel the pleasure of the laughing, yeah.
Uh-oh. He's got his hand on a book, so he must be feeling something.
Yeah, holding a book.
Holding a book.
Being able to hold the book.
To express how he feels.
Yeah. What about his physical? What about his motor?
To sit up.
Yeah. He's being able to sit himself down, isn't he? He's being able to hold himself sitting. He's not falling over or lying down. He's holding himself up against gravity and sitting. What else has he got on there? What else is he doing? He looks like he's really into it, isn't he? So he's concentrating. He's laughing because he's read something. He's holding the book up the right way. He knows which way to follow the words. Anything else? He's understanding what's humorous. You know, he's reading that line. He knows that that actually is funny. That's why it's worth laughing. Ooh, getting close. Okay. He knows to go and find a book and read it. He knows at that point not to pick up his phone. He's a bit young. Okay. Maybe not go and find food. He's sat there, he's engrossed, he's concentrating and he's attending, okay? He's not going off and thinking, right, I'm just going to go and have a drink now and come back. I'm just going off and doing that. I'm coming back. It's his concentrated time, he's focused, okay? So we kind of look at everything in a bit of a physical. From a therapist side, I go in and I look at people in a physical way, and I look at people in a process way as well, their cognitive process skills. I look at them in a behavioural way as well. This guy's obviously very happy, but we don't know what he's reading. Could be really inappropriate that he's laughing. Okay? So that's the kind of thing that we sort of unpick and try and work out. We also look at sensation. That's obviously a big part of it. you know, he's touching and holding it? Is he ripping the pages every time he turns it? Because he actually doesn't really know how to hold them. You look at children, don't you, when they start opening books, first thing they do is shove it in their mouth to try and find out if it tastes nice. But that's a sensation thing. And also then they don't realise that they have to do it carefully to turn over a page, otherwise they're going to rip it. And then they go backwards when you're trying to read the story that way. You're showing them. So everything you're doing is teaching and laying down those neuro pathways so that they know what to do. Can we get this into a big screen? Here we go, there we go, there we go, there we go. So close. Hang on a minute, view. Is it there?
Yeah.
Eureka moment. Okay. Fly through that. Okay. Okay. Great. So the brain allows us to do all of those things. It's the brain that's controlling that, the brain that has learned that. Okay. That's right. Okay. And even back in old ancient times, they realised very clearly that the brain was quite an important organ, even though later on we're chopping bits off it to make it feel better, even though even today we'll shoot electric shocks across it when people are really depressed, you know, electrocute the brain, just cheer somebody up. But those are the kind of things that today, even now, we're still researching all the time, and new developments are coming all the time around how to develop these brains. Okay, so then we're going to go into injury time now, basically. What happens when you have an injury? All right? Essentially, a brain injury, everybody has a different set of problems, okay? There are 3 key factors with brain injury, okay, about sort of recovery and how they get better. Number 1, what was the person like before their injury? Now, that could be a 5-year-old child, that could be an 18-year-old, it could be any one of us, it could be 90-year-old, okay? So what was that person like before the brain injury? How had their brain developed already? Okay? And then what's actually happened to the brain? So that's the second factor. What happened to the brain in the injury? All right? What's been damaged? What was the accident? What was the result of that accident? And the third thing is what happens after the injury. Everybody's care pathway is very different. Depends where they live in the world, depends what access they've got to health services, it depends what family setup they've got. So everything around the brain injury and that person who sustains that brain injury affects. So those are the 3 key factors I always think about when I'm treating somebody with brain injury, and that really determines how well they're going to do at the end of the day. Okay. Key facts. There's usually about 1 million head injuries. Now this is what we're talking about, is actual injury to the head. This is not a disease process. This is not, you know, suddenly being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. This is people that have actually had an acquired brain injury, traumatic brain injury. It all means the same thing, okay? It's an injury to the brain, okay? Now, don't get too bogged down with the severe, moderate and mild, because all the time they are trying to categorise the type of head injury you've got. At the end of the day, you have a head injury. You will have some of the symptoms that we face when we're working with head injury. The way it's categorised is predominantly around how long you lose consciousness for, okay, as to whether it's severe, major, etc., etc. So we'll talk about that a bit more. The long-term effects is probably the biggest thing that we in the community working with these clients will see, and the effect that it has on families, on relatives, on carers, on schools and education systems, on work employees. That's what we will probably see most of in the community. So 1 in every 300 will be affected by the long-term effects. Okay, so the causes, pretty obvious really. Road traffic accidents, get that spit out, including bicycles. I've seen a huge number of increase with bicycles over the last 5 years, predominantly because we're all being told to get on our bikes, be healthier and everything. Then we've got the lycra-clad middle-aged man going out, sorry, apologies, stereotype, out to the mountains and the hills in the weekends, and I've been treating quite a few of those recently. So essentially road traffic accidents actually account for 40 to 50% of most of the traumatic brain injuries, okay? Assaults, big one. After the pub, everybody gets a bit rowdy, or even just walking down the street, people get upset, anger, aggression, out it comes, and it's a blow to the head. Falls. When you think about a fall, you think about, oh, trip over and fall in the street. But actually, I've had 2 people that fell down their stairs, one of them being a 40-year-old woman just carrying her cup of tea up to her bedroom to get back into bed and read her book. She fell down those stairs, and at the bottom of her stairs was the sideboard. Please go home and look at your stairs and look at what's at the bottom of your stairs, because that's the first thing as an occupational therapist. I'm always looking at environment, I'm looking at the risks. And I have to say, I'm guilty. I have something at the bottom of my stairs. I have gradually started moving it further and further back, but that simple act of walking upstairs that we do every day automatically, and you slip that once, and that's what happens. Changed her life forever. Sports and industrial accidents, ski accidents. Obviously there's been quite a couple of high profile people, ski accidents, out they go, bang the head. Also industrial accidents at work, right? Alcohol, drugs, big area of brain anoxia, brain death, okay, where they're killing off the cells, but ultimately you go out on that binge drink, you get picked up, blah, blah, blah. Actually, what they don't look at, they look at the liver, they look at all the organs. What they tend not to look at is why then suddenly this person is terribly confused and their behaviour is very disturbed. And it's because of alcoholism. So that's a little bit different, because obviously it's not an immediate assault to the head, but it is there and it's part of what we classify in brain injury. If a car's travelling at 45 miles an hour and you're sat in it, and then along comes a car the opposite direction and bang, smash. Your brain travels from 45 miles an hour to 0. And in that moment, it doesn't really matter what kind of helmet you've got on your head, because essentially that brain is going to go wham into that skull, okay? So this is the really gory bit, sorry. But what you've got to think of in that instance, so you've got 3 sort of key areas of where the brain injury and how that works. So the first is bleeding, okay? So you wham, that brain hits in the head, okay? And what you will often find, and this is what paramedics often say, is they'll get to the scene and the person is completely fine. Compass mentors, no problem, talking away and everything, explaining what happened. They get out, they even sometimes get out and they're directing traffic and saying everything's fine, we're all okay. And then what's happening at that point is that brain is obviously not very well, and the bleeding has started. And the bleeding's starting wherever it is in the brain, and it's building. And it's building, and the pressure is growing. They go home, they have a lie down, a bit tired, got a bit of a headache, not surprisingly, and it starts getting uncontrollable. And this is why you get these incidents and these reports of people that walk away from the accident and yet that night they're dead. So I don't know if you remember Natasha Richardson on her ski slope, on her nursery ski slope, and it was like, nursery slope, what? She fell over, banged her head, got up, went out that night, had dinner, went to bed, didn't wake up. Because that blood is basically pressurising that soft, squishy tissues, and they're being pressed and pressed and pressed. And what's happening is if it gets right into that brainstem, like we've spoken about, that's where your heart control is, your lung control is, so everything starts getting pressurised and the body starts shutting down because it can't cope. So bleeding is one of the big areas. Second area is tearing, okay? You've seen those crash test dummy road adverts, vroom, you know, forward it goes. So if you imagine our poor skulls with our brain inside, what it does is it rips across the frontal lobe and it comes back. So you're flinging forward and back, okay? So it's ripping and tearing. But what also is happening in that instance is all of those amazing axons and all those wires inside are also being, like an elastic band, pulled and pulled back again. Now, the way that we pick up what's the injury and what's happening is through MRI scans, which is like slices all the way through to look at the picture of where's the blood, where's the breaks, where's what's going on, or CT scans, which is a brain X-ray. And again, that will show shadows of black and spaces where things aren't working, or there's a bit of a block out, or there's blood. It's really, really, really hard to pick up those tiny, tiny rips and tears inside the brain, and sometimes it doesn't come up. And always, I remember speaking to a neurology friend of mine, and he turned around to me and he said, the thing is, when somebody says, actually, MRI scan is positive, it's great, there's nothing there, that's a negative. Because actually what you're thinking is, we can't actually see what's going on because this brain is just so compact, we can't see it. And the way that I've described it to people is, if you had a giant block of ice in front of you and you smacked it really hard, the outside is unlikely to chip or break, but what will happen inside the ice block is all that crack, 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 all the way through, all those little tears. You aren't going to be able to repair that. Even if you put it back in the freezer, all the tears remain, don't they? All those rips and things in the ice remain. You can't fix it. And this is the big problem with brains, is that once those cells are dead, they are dead. They don't come back, they don't regrow. So that's why we have to think very cleverly about neurorehabilitation, and I'll explain that a bit later. The third area, okay, for brain injury and how this works is, again, it's swelling. So you drop a great big bowling ball on your foot, you damn well know about it for a start, but secondly, what happens? Swelling, and a great big colour bruising, because that is basically the blood coming up under the surface, isn't it? And then you get swollen, swollen, swollen. So where's that swelling going to go in your brain? You've got that really hard, there's nothing coming out of that cranium. There's nothing coming out of your skull, okay? So what they will do, again, is they'll start pressurising, and again, it's all fragile and squishy, and all the blood, all the blood cells are going, hang on a minute, can't cope with this anymore. So what they will do is they will put in a shunt, they will put in a relief. So that's why when you look on Grey's Anatomy, or you watch any of those hospital, the great big amazing, neurosurgeon comes in and he drills boreholes into the head. And that is literally what they're doing. But you've got to be really careful with that, because if the swelling is too great, that's when they go, oh, eyes have blown. It's because basically the pressure is so much behind the eyes and so much, it can't get out. Just can't go anywhere. So when those boreholes go in, they've got to be very steady, very monitored, very controlled how they do it. They can't just go, oh, there we go, there's the relief, because all your brain will start coming out. Nice image, sorry. Okay, I'm going to rip through this. Basically, male, 3-to-1. More likely to have one if you're a boy, sorry. 2/3 of the head injuries are aged under 30. Why do you think that is?
More adventurous?
Yeah, yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Any one of us could be walking along the street, just unfortunate, you could get run over. You could be crossing the pedestrian crossing and you're looking both ways, but that person just happens to be on their wretched phone. God, it's my biggest bugbear at the moment, like a really nightmare. But 1 second, bang, there they are, gone. None of us know when it's going to happen, live your life. But there are going to be higher areas, and that risk and impulsivity is the big area of risk, obviously. And when there's so much research out at the moment about adolescents, I don't know if any of you've got teenagers, and this whole issue with basically their inability to make decisions, plan, blah, 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 because basically they've got their brilliant Neanderthal brain, or I'm going to hit him, or I'm hungry, I need to eat now. They've got that beautifully laid down, that's all great. What they haven't got is that finer stuff that we were talking about, those neuro pathways to understand that actually to hit that person, the consequences of that is not good. What's going to happen in that instance. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They don't have those guys, because I understand it's something like 15 to 25 years old. You've got to keep working on them with their neuro pathways and tell them what's right and wrong, how to plan, how to organise. You can imagine my children, they hate me because I'm doing occupational therapy on them all the time. But it's another reason why they're so tired, because it takes a lot of hard work to get this stuff working. So that's part of it. There is obviously prevalence in areas which are particularly poor, or there's unemployment, again, because the risk is high. You can't step out, can you? You cannot step out of the door now without health and safety, or in a workplace, health and safety. I know all of you, I'm sure, have a care plan that you work from that is health and safety, you know, tick, 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 tick. How do you handle a person? The equipment has to be checked every year, annually. How many times? Is the wheelchair working effectively? If it isn't, keep the person in bed because we can't take them out in case. You know, everything's risk assessed. But there are a lot of areas that aren't risk assessed and we can't control. So that's why. Okay, I've gone through this a bit, the whole areas, but essentially the main ones are assault, where, well, we've talked about it, hemorrhaging and bleeding. Going into this quickly, mild head injury, moderate head injury, severe head injury. Like I said, terminology is changing all the time around this, but the way in which they are graded is predominantly around this loss of consciousness. So I don't know, post-concussion syndrome was a big thing in the World Rugby World Cup that was on 2015. Panorama did a big show. You know, they're now doing this whole concussion rule about bringing kids off the field, and then you're not allowed to play for 3 weeks and you have to be assessed, etc., etc. Loss of consciousness basically is just if you hit and you can't remember anything and you're out. Okay, in that time, something is going on in that brain. It's been knocked so badly that the brain has gone, oh, hang on a minute, I need to reboot. I need to restart myself and come back round. And then people come out of it and they're like, oh God, where am I? What's been going on? What they've decided now is post-concussion syndrome, everybody was like, oh, it's brilliant, because actually with post-concussion syndrome, it's probably the one area of brain injury that you'll always recover from. Absolutely. But we're all saying that. We don't know. No one's got that imagery. Nobody's got the diffusional MRI, which is the one that can see some of these tears. So statementing mild, moderate and severe. The thing with a severe is probably more likely that we might see with the care. But essentially, severe head injuries are going to be 48 hours and longer. So this is where you get your clients that are in comas, and they stay in comas for months, sometimes years. There is also enforced coma. Okay, why do you think people are put into comas when they have a head injury?
So their brain heals.
Yeah, because this poor old brain of ours, if it gets injured, you're not going to put it in a plaster of Paris and go, don't use it. Don't use it for 6 weeks, then we'll take the plaster off and then we can start, you know, doing some gentle physio. We'll be fine. This makes us breathe. This makes our hearts work. This makes us understand the world. This makes us recognise our children. So you cannot you can't basically stop the brain from working. So an enforced coma is done when somebody has had such severe accidents, they need to allow their brain to rest. And they are monitored, and that's why they get passive range of movements all the time, because as soon as you're not moving, what happens? Everything atrophies, everything shut down. You get rigid. That's when you get all the contractures coming in. That's when all the pressure sores start coming in, because essentially that whole brain has gone, it's just helping you breathe. Okay? Sure. Oh, that wasn't bad timing, was it? What time is this bit finished? Look at that, 10:20. I've got 5 minutes. Anybody got any questions on this bit? That was a real whirlwind trip on brain injury, brain anatomy. But essentially, you've got to understand a little bit about that to be able to work with your clients. Just general. I mean, is anybody seeing brain injury clients at the moment? Have you got any brain injury clients that you're working with generally? Yeah? Are they mobile and out in the community, or are they bed-bound, wheelchair-bound?
Out of the community.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah?
He's wheelchair bound.
Okay, so he is wheelchair-bound, so, okay. So you do, you know, I've got clients that are wheelchair bound. I've got people that are walking around that you know, as they say, nobody knows anything's going on. And they love that in the beginning stages because they think, oh, you know, we're fine. It's actually the people around them that are going, they really are not fine. This is not going on. So that's how that works. But obviously with the more physical, it's much easier for them to see that something is wrong and to be able to translate it to people and explain it to people. And then what usually happens when they go into hospital after a road traffic accident, they're so smashed up with all the orthopedic injuries and, you know, the spleen that's got ripped and everything else that's going on. They get patched up, they get all the orthopedic injuries sorted out, everything done. Then they go through a bit of rehabilitation to get physically walking again, etc., etc. And all the consultants are saying, oh, 6 months' time you'll be fine, you just need this orthopedic. And then they get home. And then that's when they realise, oh boy, this person's actually not the same. They're sleeping all the time. And there's something else going on here. And that's when they start identifying that actually there's been a huge brain issue going on as well that has not been picked up and managed, even in that whole time that they were in the hospital. It just hasn't been happening. So,
do they generally give an MRI if you have a road traffic accident, or is that not the case? Is that something you have to ask?
It's usually general. If somebody comes in complete, you know, you've seen it on those
Like
24 hours in A&E
yeah.
in St George's Hospital, and they're brought in on the helicopters and everything. They do a general assessment, but essentially if somebody is out, they will do an MRI because they'll need to know why that person's unconscious. So it is usually standard. But remember what I was saying about bleeding. It doesn't happen instantly. The brain doesn't just go flood with blood. Oh, there it is. We need to sort it out. So this is why often they will keep people in. So, you know, if your kids had banged their head and everything, you always take them to A&E and then they give you a lovely leaflet saying, look out for sickness, look out for tiredness, look out for confusion and everything, because those are the signs of really where the brain is not coping very well and then things are changing. So that's why that's at that area. But ultimately, when somebody comes in from a massive major road traffic accident, their initial point is, right, how do we save this person from dying? Right, assess, assess, assess. That's why they have everybody around the bed from all the different specialties going assess, assess, assess. But then they have to go and do those tests. But are they stable enough to go in that machine, etc., etc.?
Yeah, so just a couple of things ways to follow up from what you were saying. I think from what we were just saying earlier about some of the clients you see, that obviously with brain injury, and you know, you'll learn more about it through the day. And I think we were saying earlier, there's so much we could talk about this. We could be here all week. So this isn't a snapshot. But because the brain's so complicated and there's so different bits to it, and that how your injuries occur depends on exactly which bit's been affected and which bit then links into something else in the brain, that everyone you see will be so different in terms of how they might have been affected. And like we were saying, there'll be people who appear to be absolutely fine, but they might have one subtle part of the brain that's been affected, and that might be really transforming in their lives. So it's just trying to get those assessments and piece together exactly what's going on for that person and where things might be going wrong and why. And also following what you were saying about the scans, I think one of the things people may, when they go into hospital, have CT scans and MRI scans that might tell us a bit about, and are really helpful, and do tell us a bit about what's happened in the brain and where it's been affected, because obviously if we can understand where, then we can understand a bit about what we're going to expect, which again we'll talk about a bit more later, but about what to expect in terms of the problems someone will have. But equally, particularly for people when they've had these
shearing
injuries where the brain's just basically been shook up completely. Often that doesn't come out in scans, or not the scans that we can afford to do day to day. So the hospital might say, yeah, they had a scan and it's all clear. But actually, the brain's been shook up like this. It's not. It's not far.
How do you diagnose it then?
I mean, that particular sort of one talking about the shearing, they talk about it's a diffuse axonal injury, and that can come out, so particularly through the work that I do. So I'll do assessments with people where we look very specifically, do lots of tests where we look at how is their memory working, how is their processing,
spatial awareness,
attention. We sort of look at all those different bits, and so that can show us quite clearly if there's quite significant problems there. I mean, there are more advanced scans that people that they can do in the hospitals, but there's not always the funds to do it, unfortunately. So, but they have developed much more advanced scanning.
As far as surgery is concerned, like, can there be any repair as such of the brain, or that's?
No, there's lots of, like I said, I mean, basically cells in the brain, once they're dead, they're dead. That's what has been completely identified and recognised. They're not just going to sprout out again or regrow. And it's the same really, if you cut off an arm, it's not going to regrow a hand. It's, the cells just don't regenerate like that. Surgery with brain injury is predominantly around surviving the brain. So again, it's release of the pressure, it's evacuating blood if possible. But it's also, where a bruise might be so significant, they might have to intervene at that point and take a decision on how they manage that as well. A lot of the time they will take off cranial flaps as well, which is where they actually will take out part of the bone of the skull, to again allow that brain to fully rest. And then people get the titanium plates put back in their head, and that keeps it nice and safe again. But ultimately they will take sometimes the whole of that skull piece off and allow for that brain to rest and reduce again. So that's kind of the neurosurgery that happens after brain injuries. Obviously the more neurosurgery you think about is brain tumour removals, etc. But again, have a brain tumour removed, they're going to nip some of those cells or take things away that they shouldn't, because it's just part of how the intricacy of it is. So often they will end up getting brain injury symptoms and cognitive challenges or vestibular problems depending on the site of that tumour. So again, we manage all our neurological conditions very similarly. It's very much about really what they want to optimise in their life and how they manage to recover and get back from their injury state. So that's what rehab is.
I mean, I think what we often say is in the first year to 18 months to 2 years up, that period after an injury, then the brain tries to kind of find new ways around and it tries to find ways to recover. Again, there's only so much it can do, because when it's bits are dead, it's dead. But it tries to, and so you do see some natural recovery in that 18 months or so. But then after that, it is a very, it's kind of where it's at that point.
It's the hardest question to ask when people say, when will I get better? There isn't an answer to that, and ultimately what you're working with, and I'm sure Emma will talk about this so I won't say much more, but it's really their stages of grief and acceptance, okay, about where they are on that journey through their recovery.
But the recovery that does happen naturally is very subtle.
Yeah,
really.
very subtle.
The brain's been injured, it's been injured.
Yeah.
What do you say, when somebody asks you that, when do you think I'll get better? Or
Well, I always do the optimist thing. That's me. But essentially, I've got a client that I still work with. He's 16 years post-accident. Okay. Now, from him, it's much more of a psychological process and an accepting process, and it's his insight and its awareness. And as he's accepted things, he's much more open and able to take on more and more. But I always say, the first 18 months are crucial. If you're going to get regrowth, and we'll talk about this neuroplasticity word, if we're going to start getting any of that working, it's key in that 18 months. Certainly when people have strokes, the doctor, this is why they had the FAST campaign with stroke, and it was like, get them quickly as possible, get them diagnosed, get them sorted out, maintained, managed, etc., and then get that rehab started as quickly as possible. And their window, they're saying, is 12 weeks. That's why the NHS is kind of funded 12 weeks. Then they go into the community and they get 6 to 12 weeks depending on their goal achievement. And then it's kind of like, well, that's what the research says. I don't agree with it. Wherever the goals are being met, wherever we're still making gains, we should continue and keep working with it, because all of it is about repetition. And we'll come to that in cognitive rehab. But keep thinking about children and babies and how they learn and how they grow. And everything is about repeat, and learn without error and keep going. And then that's how they take on and learn all their motor, balance, walking, standing. Tea?